Okay, I'm ready when you are.
Awesome. Well, welcome, you guys. Thanks for joining us today. Like we just said, talking with your clients, communicating effectively, conveying to them what the expectations are, what their findings truly mean, what their options are, and how to handle all of it going forward is truly the foundation of every aspect of the transaction, but especially inspections. They can be things that are quite frightening, and some of them are items of concern. Others are simply written that way, right? And so the way we communicate with our clients really matters. Today, we're going to talk about all of that for leading up to the inspection, during the inspection, navigating the findings, navigating the repairs, and even things afterwards. So if you don't know him yet, you should. This is Josh. He's with Open Window Home Inspections. He does a ton of trainings like this with us. And for so many reasons, he is someone that we hold dearly, but this is it, especially the way you communicate with clients during inspections is one of the trickiest parts. And so it really matters. Josh, thank you for being here today. Thanks for helping us have meaningful conversations with our people and
Yeah.
helping them feel really comfortable throughout this process.
Absolutely, I appreciate the introduction. And I tell you what, this is something when I first started doing inspections 8 years ago, it was never taught to me. So, first, I want to thank for everybody for being here today. And this session is really going to be about making that inspection phase smoother for you, your clients, and for the deal itself, honestly. So, but again, like 8 years ago, this wasn't taught. The communication part wasn't taught to me at all. It was taught how to do inspections, and that's how a lot of inspectors and even contractors that's how they do their work day in and day out. They just communicate with however they want, and then they just let it go. So our goal here today is simple: cut through the noise, help reduce the overwhelm, and give you a system that actually makes inspection results easier to explain and easier for your clients to understand. So, and you already know this about us. At Open Window, one of our core focuses is about making the inspection process clear, simple, and easy for clients to understand. And today, again, it's about helping you strengthen that trust after the inspection ends with the inspector, because that's when the real conversation begins. And a lot of inspectors don't know that. So here's the real friction in the inspection phase that nobody talks about. It's not that people don't know how to rank what's wrong. It's that most buyers, some agents, and honestly, a lot of home inspectors don't know the buyer's actual priorities well enough to help them rank anything. And honestly, people avoid ranking items because they're scared of saying something the clients might hold against them later on. If something goes wrong after closing, nobody wants to be the one who said, yeah, that wasn't a big deal. So what ends up happening? Everyone steps back and says, well, the client needs to decide. But the client can't decide because they can't understand the severity, the function, or the actual risk. So everything stalls right then and there. That hesitation, that fear of prioritizing is what creates overwhelm, not the defect itself, not the report, it's the lack of structure. So once you give people a clean way to prioritize, that stress completely gone. It drops immediately. You can see my screen, correct? The real threat inside the inspection process. Okay. So you've all heard me say some version of this before, and you already know most of what's on this slide. What actually causes inspection problems is rarely the condition of the home. It's everything around how the information is delivered, received, and interpreted. And here's some examples. Client misreads things, which we all know that a lot of inspectors have to go above and beyond on some of these inspection narratives. Inspectors use jargon to sound more knowledgeable, and inspectors do that just because they want to, because they can, and they feel like they have to, and they don't need to. Report narratives overwhelm instead of clarify. More beating around the bush than actually telling you what you need to do after and what the real issue is. Contractors inflate problems to win the job. Sellers cut corners with cheap repairs. Minor issues get treated like safety hazards, and the list goes on. So none of this is new to most of you. And if it is, get used to it because you're going to see it a lot. But here's what's most important of all. All these issues show up when there isn't any consistent way to understand what actually matters. And when there's no structure, everyone involved starts reacting based on emotion, assumption, and pressure. That's why the reaction becomes bigger than the defect itself. So yes, we've all lived this, but today is about understanding what's underneath it, the missing framework, and how fixing that one thing can stabilize the entire inspection process. Clients get overwhelmed. And let's be honest, we already know how clients get overwhelmed. That's not new information. What matters is why it keeps happening even when the house is not that bad. And here's the real reason. Clients are listening to an inspection through a lens of an emotional purchase. Going through the buying process is very emotional. They're not hearing what we think we are saying. They are hearing what they are afraid might happen. And when fear is in that mix, even simple findings start feeling huge. They get a pile of information with no way to sort it. They do not know what matters today versus what matters in a year. They don't know what is normal wear versus an actual problem. And they have no idea how to stack any of it in order of importance. So they default to the only thing they know how to do. They assume the worst. They want guarantees. They want safety. They want certainty that does not exist in the real estate industry. That's what makes simple items feel big. Not the defect, not the house, not the report. It's the buyer sitting there trying to make a huge decision with zero structure to lean on. And when you're able to give them that structure, the overwhelm drops almost immediately. Now let's shift into something more practical. This is the part most people never get taught. And it's what separates a high-level inspector from someone who just reads off a checklist. And this is the three-part system. And I love this system. The system is not technical. It's simple. Clients understand it immediately. And once they do, everything gets easier for you. Every finding in a home fits into three categories: severity, function, and risk. When you use those three categories with your clients, you give them a way to understand the inspection without getting overwhelmed. It helps them see what actually matters instead of reacting to every single line item. So when clients ask, is this a big deal or should I worry about this? You don't have to guess or feel like you're stepping into inspector territory. You can walk them through these three filters and let the structure do the work for you. This is how you stay confident in the conversation. This is how clients stay grounded. And this is how you keep the deal from getting pulled into unnecessary drama. So let's start with understanding severity. Severity gets misunderstood more than anything else during an inspection. And it's not because the issue is complicated, it's because no one gives the buyer a real frame of reference. We all know what happens when a buyer walks into a home. They expect everything to look and function like the same way it did when it was built in 1999. So even normal wear and tear looks severe to them. So the real value of explaining severity is that it resets expectations back to reality. Most items in a home are not severe. They are signs that a home has been lived in and is aging. A loose handrail, a worn seal, an aging component, a cracked tile are all everyday conditions. We as professionals see this day in and day out, but when a buyer is under pressure, everything can start to feel like a major problem. So when you talk about severity, you're not just labeling the issue, you're giving the buyer a realistic scale so they do not treat every observation like a crisis. Severity is really about perspective. Once the client has that perspective, the rest of the conversation becomes easier. Let's talk about function. Function is usually where clients stress out the fastest. And it's not because something is actually failing, it's because most people don't understand what the word functioning actually means in the inspection world. When inspectors say something is functioning, we meant it's doing its job as designed and it's doing it right now. When clients hear functioning, they think it means perfect condition with no issues at all, but it's 20 years old. Those are two completely different definitions. So the moment they hear anything less than perfect, they assume failure. They assume danger or major cost. Even that is not the case. And that is your moment to shine. You help reset that definition. You help them understand that functioning does not mean flawless. And you tell them functioning means the system works today. And now the question becomes timing, planning, or improving, not panic. When clients understand what functioning truly means, they stop jumping to conclusions and start making decisions that are grounded instead of emotional. Assessing risk. Risk is the part clients struggle with the most because it forces them to think about the future, and most people are already nervous about the present. Risk answers one question: what is the realistic outcome if this is not handled the right way? The key word is realistic. Clients do not think in realistic outcomes. They think in worst case outcomes. Then they jump straight into the most dramatic version of what could happen, even when the actual likelihood is low. In that moment, the client does not need predictions or guarantees. They need help separating what is likely from what is simply possible. Most worries come from imagining extreme outcomes, not from what is actually probable. By giving them that perspective, they can see the difference between a real concern and an imagined one. You're not choosing for them. You're not helping them understand you're helping them understand the situation clearly enough so they can make their own decisions with confidence. If there is real risk, we say it. If the risk is low and something can be monitored, we say that too. This gives the buyer a path forward instead of a list of fears. Risk helps clients make decisions with a clear head, not a scared one. Once they understand the difference between possibly or possible and likely, the rest of the inspection process becomes much more manageable. So the outcome of this system, when you use this three-part system, you give your clients, I sound like an info commercial. When you use this system now, when you use the three-part system, you give your clients something solid to stand on. They are no longer reacting to a list. They are filtering information through a structure that makes sense. And here's the part that most people forget. Clients do not need perfect answers. They need direction. They need something that helps them process what they're hearing so they can move forward without second guessing every line. And the minute a client understands where a finding sits inside the system, the emotional part of the conversation drops and the practical part finally begins. This is where you'll hear them asking better questions. They can see which items matter today and which ones can wait. They stop treating everything with the same level of urgency. And for you, this means smoother conversations, fewer circular debates, and far less time spent trying to calm someone down who is reacting to the wrong thing. This system is not about making the report smaller. It's about making the information usable. Once clients can use it, everything becomes easier, and that is what stabilizes the inspection conversation. Now, let's get real about the things that tend to destabilize it because these are the areas where clients usually get pulled off track. Excuse me. What causes deal stress during the inspection? Just about everything, I feel sometimes. Now, let's get real about the things that tend to destabilize the inspection process because these are the areas where clients usually get pulled off track pretty quick. We already talked about the buyer panic. They panic because they don't have a structure like severity, function, and risk. Without that, even a small note in the report can send them straight to the worst case thinking. The next one is seller shortcuts. We've all seen the type of repair that raises suspicion the second you look at it. The problem is not the defect. The problem is the message that sloppy repair sends to the buyer. It creates doubt about the seller more than anything else. From what I understand, many of you avoid this by negotiating concessions. And personally, I think that's one of the smartest approaches you can take. Then we have the contractor and handyman. Some are fantastic. Don't get me wrong. Some are really fantastic. Some unintentionally escalate everything. And if you're the type you might want to run from, many speak in an absolute term. They focus on the dramatic scenarios, and their tone alone can make something manageable sound urgent or extreme. These three patterns can create more deal stress than the findings themselves ever will. The home is not the issue, it's the noise around the home that is. But here's the advantage you have. Once your client understands the three-tier system, severity, function, and risk, most of that noise loses its power. They stop reacting to tone and start focusing on facts. And here's the part that inspectors will not talk about or even say anything about. The inspection phase gets noisy when the inspector is not confident in their own delivery. Most inspector-created stress does not come from the findings. It comes from how the inspector presents them. If the inspector sounds unsure, the client becomes unsure. If the inspector sounds overly technical, the client becomes overwhelmed. And if the inspector sounds dramatic, the client becomes scared. Most inspectors are never taught how to deliver findings, and they will not admit that. And I'm not afraid to admit it. I have made some big, huge mistakes in the past with just by delivering that report. And I feel like this is one of the things that are closest to me that I love teaching my guys is how to communicate. So a lot of inspectors talk too much because they think more information means more value. And it usually just creates confusion. Some inspectors talk in a way that makes them sound impressive, or as I call it, jargon, but it leaves the client with no real understanding. And sometimes the inspector talks to the report instead of talking to the buyer, which means the client is listening to data instead of guidance. None of this is intentional, but the impact is real. When the inspector floods the client with details, you as the agent are the one who pays for it later in the conversation. What are we trying to do here? Or excuse me. What we try to do here at Open Window Home Inspection is the opposite. We focus on giving the clients usable information and not a speech. We simplify without dumbing anything down. We stay available so you're not stuck trying to re-explain something that never landed right the first time. When an inspector handles the delivery well, you feel it immediately. Clients stop spinning, you stop putting out fires, and everyone finally gets to talk about the house instead of the chaos around it. We just talked about how inspectors, seller, and contractors can create noise in the inspection phase. So the question becomes this: when the client gets pulled off track, how do you bring them back to clarity without overstepping your role? This is where a few simple grounding phases can help. Not scripts, not advice, just a quick reset that points the client back to the structure they already understand. And the goal isn't to calm the client. The goal is to redirect them to clarity. So for example, if the client is reacting to a tone the inspector or contractor used instead of facts, you can say something like, let's look at what was actually found. If they are spiraling into worst case thinking, you can ask, where do you think this sits in the severity function or risk structure we talked about? If they are confusing a preference with a problem, something as simple as, is this a repair or an upgrade for you? That can easily reset the conversation. These phrases do not answer for them. They simply nudge them back into the framework so they can see the information the right way again. This is how you stay helpful without becoming the inspector. And by this point in the process, the client usually has one big question. What do I do with this information? We get this all the time. That is where the decision tree becomes useful. It's not here to reteach anything. It's a simple way to turn all that noise into a clear next step. The three-tier system gives the client clarity on what they're looking at. The decision tree gives them clarity on what to do next. These two pieces work together. One helps the client understand the issue. The other helps them decide how to handle it. And using it is pretty simple. You just guide the client through each step with questions and not answers. You start with function by asking, is it working today? Then severity. How serious does this feel to you? Then urgency. Excuse me. When do you think this needs attention? Then risk. What do you think could realistically happen if it waits? By the time they answer those four questions, the choice usually becomes clear to them. Repair, negotiate, monitor, or ignore. This keeps you out of the business of ranking items or telling the client what they should do. You are giving them a way to move from understanding to action without guessing or panicking. And I have a PDF for this, so if you're trying to write it down, don't worry about that. It's all on the sheet for you. So let me make this really simple. The decision tree you just saw is the filter. These four paths are the outcome. Function, severity, urgency, and risk do not give you answers. They give you clarity. Once the client sees the issues through that filter, choosing a path becomes obvious to them. And here's how they naturally line up. If something is not functioning or carries meaningful risk, clients usually choose repair. If the item still functions but adds cost or concern, clients often choose to negotiate for credit or price adjustment. If the item is functioning with low risk and low urgency, the clients tend to choose monitor, which means plan for it or budget for it or keep an eye on it. And if the item is cosmetic or has no real impact, clients often choose to ignore it completely. You are not deciding for them. You are not ranking the items. You are helping them take the clarity they gain from the decision tree and turn it into a next step that feels right for them. When you put that tree and the paths together, the client no longer feels stuck. They are not reacting, they are deciding, and that's the whole goal here. So everything you saw today really comes down to this. Clients don't need a perfect house, they need clarity. When they understand what they're looking at, everything else becomes easier. And the questions and the decisions and negotiations, all of it. This is what stabilizes the inspection phase for you. So this was a short one, but a fantastic one. So I appreciate you all being here today. And if anything comes up in your inspections, reach out. We're here to keep the process clear and going for you. So I am going to grab this link and drop the PDF link into the chat for you and open this up for questions.
Thank you, Josh. I wanted
You're
to add a
welcome.
few things. I wrote down a few notes as you were talking, but one thing I wanted to just underline, like I know we all know this, but the inspections are just one of the scariest parts of the process, right? Like our body is designed to keep us safe. It is so understandable for people to just have fear, like living inside of them. And so all of these scripts are incredible, but at the same time, it is the most powerful thing we can do is to just ask our client, like, what is most concerning about this to you and why? And just give them a chance to be heard. Like none of this matters if all we're doing is throwing like scripts at them or over explanations or like this is normal because it's not normal to them. This isn't something they do all the
Right.
time. And so just giving them a chance to be heard, sometimes they just need to say it. And then sometimes once they've said it, they're like, oh yeah, okay, like that actually isn't so bad, you know? Or maybe their fear is something that we haven't at all thought about. And so just giving them a chance to underline that because sometimes there's things that we are worried about and then they're not at all worried about or vice versa. So I think that's really important. Um, Also, a few other things. The inflated issues by vendors, that's so important. Like inspectors aren't necessarily bad about that, right? Like a normal home inspector is a third party vendor, they're hired by the client. But if we are bringing in specialists, HVAC people, plumbers, foundation people, those are all, they are providing an inspection, but they are all vendors of that system. And so we just need to let the clients know before those people arrive that, like, hey, heads up, these people are here to sell us something, right? So we do want to get information. We do want to know the extent of things. And at the same time, it isn't uncommon for these people to inflate what the situation is. Some are so much more, I don't want to say honest, right? But like transparent about what's needed. And then others will bring in more issues because they've got a they've got a sale to make, you know, and so just making sure they know that. And so encouraging people to shop around, but also like sometimes more vendors isn't better, you know, like there's a reason one of them is saying this is a $14,000 issue and this one's saying it's a $7,000 issue. You know, it could be more of an issue. It could be that they're selling you something. So that's a lot easier to upset on the front end before they walk in the door than afterwards when they're looking at a $14,000 bill and they're like, I don't know, you know, that ship has sailed, that panic has already set in. And then I know we say this all the time, but setting expectations when you're in showings as you're writing offers, that goes a long way as well for all of those things. So when we're seeing, hey, like by the way, this HVAC unit, I know we see it on our disclosures. I know we're really excited. I just want to make sure we're clear. It's about 15 years old. That means it's going to be at the end of its life. It is functioning as intended, though. And so we need to write our offer considering the fact that in the relatively near future, you're going to need to be replacing this. Our inspection is going to come back saying that it's at the end of its life, but it's functioning as intended. And so we can't negotiate a new HVAC unit when it's working. Just know that when we're writing the offer now, know that when we get our inspection, it's going to say that it might raise some alarms, right? Like if we see masonite siding, same type of conversations. And so just weaving it in and starting to have those conversations makes it a lot less intimidating when that inspection comes back because it's going to be a long one. Um, Josh, I'm curious if I know you talked about rating it. Do you guys, your inspections, are they the type that have like a green, yellow, red in terms of rating system? And if so, how is that done? Is that something that you guys go in and manually do? Is it something that your system does based on like an algorithm? Will you provide some clarity on that?
Yeah, so we use Spectora. If anybody ever has seen a Spectora report, they do have different colors. So ours is red, orange, and blue. Um, and a lot of inspectors will use red on everything. And to me, red means like stop. Hey, we need to look at this right now. So that's the one thing that I've always taught my inspectors. If it's red, that means it needs to be fixed and it's a safety hazard, like it's going to cause harm or some type of major damage. And orange is okay, this is damaged or not functioning. It needs to be fixed, now or in the near future. And then the blue could be more of like maintenance items, your cosmetic issues, or hey, this isn't causing an issue now, like maybe like a door rubbing on a floor. There's no damage, but over time it's going to cause that wear and tear where that door is rubbing. So that's how we have it in our inspection reports, and it depends on um, the issue itself.
That's perfect. That makes a lot of sense. That's really easy to follow. I'm gonna hop to the chat real quick because we do have a few questions in there.
Yeah,
Um, Carrie asked, what are the concerns that come up when an inspection reveals unpermitted work or updates?
I think that comes down to state laws and regulations. That's kind of getting into the real estate side of things, and I've never have gone down that path yet. Um, and that's something that you might want to reach out to maybe Brian or your leadership for on that. I don't know the answers quite much on like unpermitted work. I don't know how that's navigated in the industry.
Can you typically tell if something is unpermitted?
By the construction, sometimes you can. If you're going, wow, this thing is just a mess, then if you're hearing that a deck was constructed and there's 50 things wrong with the deck, that's a sign right there. This is probably not permitted. Um, if you have a septic system and it's over top or near the septic system, probably unpermitted. So there's signs to tell if it's leading up to unpermitted work.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Another question. What are the limits of the condition of the crawl space where you may decide not to go in, oh, due to mold, rodent droppings, structural concerns, etc.? Does this happen? And if so, what are some alternative options for moving forward?
Yeah, so we teach our inspectors that um, if it is a safety hazard for themselves, electrical lines that are cut and laying there, they obviously they have tools and things that they can test. Um, any sewage, maybe somebody put in a new shower and didn't plumb it right, and there's sewage everywhere. Um, but most of the time, our inspectors, unless they can't fit, our inspectors are getting in that crawl space regardless. I give everybody half mask, and they've got overalls. Like I push them to get into the crawl space. To me, the three major areas that I feel that should always be crawled all over is attic, roof, and crawl space. Those are the three places that should have eyes on everywhere. So if an inspector is not getting in because of mold or rodent drops, that kind of an excuse personally.
There are certainly crawl spaces where they get too narrow. And
Yeah.
in my experience, that's kind of the end of that. Is there any like scope or anything like that that can be run or used, or is that kind of it just is what it is, and you guys can't go any further if that's the case?
Yeah, some companies are starting to get like remote control cars and cameras and things like that. Some inspectors will carry like an extension pole with cameras. Um, but I know a lot of inspectors are just like, nope, I can't get in there. Uh, my where I'll stop is if I can't roll over, then like I'm not going any further. Because then it just gets scary. If you get stuck, you can't maneuver. So um, that's mine. I've got an inspector. He'll go in as far as he can. And his chest will be on the ground and the floor will be on his back, and he just goes for it. So it just all depends on how comfortable an inspector is. So, but I know a lot of inspectors they'll do that shoulder roll, and then they'll have maybe a camera pole or the electronic car.
You mentioned the roof should be something that's gone over. I know a lot of times inspectors will just take pictures or use a drone, and
Mm-hmm.
then physically going on the roof is often a separate inspection or like a roofing vendor. Do you guys physically get on the roof or do you use drones?
So I teach our guys to get on the roof if it's walkable.
Hmm.
Um, I know we've got one guy that's definitely afraid of heights and even going up and down a ladder, but I still get him on the roof. I know a lot of homes in the Raleigh area are not walkable. They're just too steep. So there's nothing wrong with a drone as long as the inspector is taking up close pictures, distance pictures from different angles, and taking at least 50 to 60 pictures of that roof. Um, if you're getting an inspector that's only taking like 10 pictures, you're not really capturing anything.
All right, a few more questions. One was, do you have an example of what your report looks like? I'd imagine for privacy reasons, you might need to take a minute to find that, or maybe just take a screenshot from one, but just an example of how that rating system goes would be great. In the meantime, another question is, at what point or level do you recommend another professional, like a structural engineer, etc.? What deciding factors do you consider in those situations?
Yeah.
Feel free to unmute if you want clarity on that or additional questions.
So recommending a structural engineer as an inspector, you really have to have several different things coming at you. Um, yeah, you could see a crack in the foundation, but you know, is it serious? Is it wider than a quarter inch? What's going on above it? What's going on around it? Is there ground erosion? Is there wall cracks? Is a window not functioning? Things like that. So the inspector has to look at everything, what's going on in that area, depending on what it is. Obviously, if it's a structural truss, that's a structural engineer automatically. There's no ifs and or buts. But when it comes to the foundation and things, you have to look at the bigger picture and exactly what's going on around it. So I can't say, hey, this is exactly what we look at and what we do to determine if we're going to say structural engineer. Um, but when in doubt, at least a general contractor should come out and look at it, and that should really help. I hope that answers. I know that's a tough one for us to answer.
Yeah. Another one that would be a good example is talking about HVAC, right? Like in a standard inspector can kind of only do a visual
Right.
inspection, whereas if you hire an HVAC specialist, they can remove the panel. Um, Same type of thing with what electrical panels, like you guys can only open it and look at those. You can't like remove a panel, correct? What are some other examples of things like that?
Yeah, so inspectors should actually be removing the face of the panel on the main electrical panel and any sub panels to look at all the wiring behind it. Obviously, we're not going to remove um, covers for switches and receptacles, but they should be looking behind those panels if it's safe enough. Sometimes you've got the Federal Pacific, which a lot of inspectors will not remove. Personally, it's my favorite because it's a challenge, and I'll remove those, but um, I would say 98% of inspectors won't. Um, so it just depends on what's going on with the electrical and things like that.
Any other questions, you guys? For the sample inspection, maybe Josh, could you just potentially like email that to me after
Yeah,
class?
I can do that.
I'll
Sorry,
include it.
I was looking for it right now.
Okay, cool. What other questions do you guys have? All right. Well,
That
thank you
is
for your
it.
time, Josh. Thank you to all of you for showing up today. As always, we appreciate it. As things come up, feel free to reach out to Josh directly. Obviously, these are great conversations to have and they're quite proactive, but it never fails. Once you're in the field, it's something completely random. And of course, it's something we haven't talked about. It's all nuanced. So, Josh is here to be a resource to us. Reach out to him if you got some buyers under contract. Reach out to him, or if you haven't yet worked with buyers, now is the perfect time to get to know your inspectors before you actually need them. Thank you guys so much for showing up today. I appreciate it. Have a great
Thank
rest
you
of your
all. Have a great week.